Well, again, good afternoon to all of you. I want to ask you the question: if I ask you to feed 5,000 people this evening, how good a job would you be able to do with that? What would you do if you were asked to do that right now? It's your responsibility. I want you to feed 5,000 people. That is, everybody on this side of Fairfield is going to come over here, and they're coming to your place for dinner tonight. How about just 5, Well, actually, we want to take a look at an example that is just that way in the book of John chapter 6, and where Jesus asked his disciples to feed 5,000 people. And this is quite an incredible story, and there are some wonderful lessons in all of this. In John chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "When Jesus looked up and he saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?' He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do." And it's kind of like I asked you this question, but I already had in mind where we were going with this. And the like. And Philip answered, it says, 8 months' wages would not be enough bread for each of them to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Have the people sit down. There's plenty of grass in that place." And the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Then Jesus took the loaves, he gave thanks, and he distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. And when they had all enough to eat, he said to the disciple, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. And after the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is a prophet who came into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come to take him by force. I mean, they were so thrilled by what he had done that they were ready to make him king. But what if Jesus hadn't fed them? How would they have thought, or how would they have reacted? Well, we don't know. But what we do know is that Jesus did see to the fact that they were fed. And we want to take a look at some of the things that I think that we can learn from this particular lesson that Jesus gives to us, and how that God provides for us in incredible ways. So we will look at this lesson because in verse 2 we see that there was a great multitude here that followed after Jesus. And why did they follow after Jesus? In verse 2 it tells us here, "And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs that he had performed on the sick." That is the reason they were following him. That can be true of any one of us. We follow God because God does wonderful, miraculous things. But how do we respond when we get ourselves, so to speak, in a difficult situation? And what Jesus had before him was indeed a difficult situation. How would we handle it? This is what we're going to look at today as we look at this, the feeding of the 5,000 with the loaves and the fishes. Because people were wanting to be healed at that particular moment. They were not asking to be fed. They were seeking healing. And we see Jesus caring for the needs of the people. He recognized what their most immediate need was, and we see him taking care of them. Now, what we see here also is that following Jesus led to a huge problem. That is, 5,000 people and no food. That is a pretty big problem. Think about your household. If you've got 5 kids, they come in and you have nothing to eat, it's a problem. I'm not even going to go to the fact that if you have 5 kids and you come home and you've got barley loaves and fishes. I have a relative that hates fish, doesn't like fish at all, so this would not sound like an answer to their problem if that supper was going to be that. And then if you got barley loaves, I don't know how many of you are fascinated with barley loaves and the like. So that might be a bit of a problem, but you've got 5,000 people to feed. That is a huge problem that are out in the middle of nowhere. Now, problems generally create a bit of panic among us and a bit of attitude. I mean, when we have problems, do we begin to develop attitudes around those particular problems? Generally speaking, and those attitudes that we develop normally aren't very positive attitudes that we develop. We start getting negative. We start criticizing. We get irritable. And then if you got a problem around food, you know how it is with food. If you're tired and hungry and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you have no food, you ever been on a camping trip where you run out of food? Yeah, people get irritable real quickly. And the problem is impossible. Basically, we see that happening here, that it's a impossible problem. And so how does Philip handle this problem? Well, first of all, we see a couple of things that are interesting about how Jesus dealt with this. When Jesus saw this great multitude, even though he knew what he was going to do, he asked one of the disciples about where can we go to buy bread. And where did the disciple immediately go to? He went to the money factor here. We don't have enough money. It would take 8 months' wages. So you calculate what your 8 months' wages are and figure, okay, this is how much money it would take. If you've got 5,000 people, let's say a dinner on average, pretty good, McDonald's, $5 to $6. So if you've got 5,000, it's going to take at least 25,000. Now that's your problem for this evening. You got $25,000 you've got to spend, and that's going to give them a hamburger and a Coke and a fry. And it's not going to give them barley loaves and fishes necessarily, but that's what you have. So he says 200 pennyworth is the way one of their money isn't sufficient for it. Now, there's an interesting thing, again, that he's saying, well, this is not adequate. In verses 8 and 9, when we deal with Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, he speaks up and says, now, well, we got a boy here who has 2 fishes and 5 loaves and the like. And where does he go as well? Well, he says, they're small loaves and they're small fishes. I mean, he's looking at the size of the loaves and he's looking at the size of the fishes. And what we find here is that it's kind of like a board meeting. When you start discussing your problems at board meetings and in our own personal lives, when a problem comes up, the first thing that hits us is our feelings. We are impacted by our feelings. I'll share this. Stacia called me yesterday to tell us how much we had left in the bank account in Santa Rosa. I heard the number, but I was immediately hit with a surge of feelings around that. Were those feelings positive? They were feelings. Like a person might be hit with, well, you've got cancer. What are you first hit with? You're first hit with feelings around that. Or if you've got this problem, or you've lost your job. Feelings hit you first, and generally they are not positive in that regard. So feelings and problems generate negative thoughts and actions. And so when we ask not only Philip, but then we go on, you think about the cost of feeding these individuals. And it is interesting that is where, of course, that Philip goes. But Jesus asks the question, where are we going to buy this much? And so he's thinking dollars-wise. So you have feelings that hit you initially, and then you've got figures. Let's take a look at the figures. They don't jive. We don't have enough money to do this.
The Worldwide Church of God Fairfield is located in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we welcome all to come and worship with us, to take the Lord's Supper with us, and to fellowship with us every week. Why not take a closer look at what we have to offer? Worship services are held every Saturday at 12 noon at 300 Marigold Drive in Fairfield, California. We'll see you there.